you see one in the sky, if you see one manifest before your very eyes, if you see a strange creature lurking outside, then tell it on accounts of the paranormal. Hear it on accounts of the paranormal. Welcome to accounts of the paranormal.
Welcome to the show. Tonight, I welcome award-winning paranormal thriller author and avid paranormal investigator and co-host of the Unfreakingbelievable Podcast, Betsey Kulakowski, who shares her journey from a young storyteller inspired by her grandfather's tales of Bigfoot to becoming a prolific writer with multiple published works, including the best-selling Veritas Codex Series. Betsey, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. Thanks for being on. When I read your email, I got so excited. You just have so much going on with you. And where do I start? Best-selling, award-winning paranormal thriller author, avid paranormal investigator. You've done numerous investigations, including Fort Reno, Oklahoma, the Scriven Hotel in Oklahoma City, Rock Island YMCA in Iowa, the May Stringer House in Florida. You've done some Bigfoot investigating as well in several states. I cannot wait to dive into that. You were also previously a safety professional and building inspector, which gave you access to a lot of places where most people couldn't go, and some notable places too. So we'll hear about that. And you're also a fellow podcaster with the Unfreakingbelievable Podcast. So you've just got a lot going on. I'm just going to turn my mic off and sit back for about an hour and let you talk. All right. So no.
We can tell some stories for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I like to do, I like to first go back into people's lives and to kind of where it started for them. So in your case, what came first for you? Was it the paranormal? Was it the writing? Where did this all start for you?
They kind of run together. I had a grandfather who was a wonderful storyteller, grew up in a poor rural farming community in Oklahoma, became a landman for oil and gas companies. And so we traveled all over the country with him when I was very little. And for a while, we were in the Pacific Northwest up near Bellingham, Washington. And I was probably 2.5, 3 years old while we were there. And that's probably the first place I ever remember hearing him tell stories about Bigfoot. And so I was immediately intrigued because it was unexplained. It was exciting. It was different. And it was one of my granddaddy's yarns. He would come up with these wonderful stories about Bigfoot. He told other yarns about growing up in Oklahoma, and he had a horse, and the adventures that he and his horse went on and the things that he did. And so I love story from the get-go. And I love stories about the unexplained fairly young. I don't remember learning how to read. My brother was 3 years older than me. So while my mother was teaching him to read, she was also teaching me to read. And my grandmother was a teacher. So, she kind of reinforced that. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted to write. Probably 6 years old, I did my own book where I made, for Christmas presents, I did cardboard covers and string binding and illustrated them myself. And I was already writing books by the time I was 6. Not anything of any literary fame or anything like that, but just really enjoyed the storytelling. And sometimes it was regurgitations and reinventations of stories my grandfather told. I wrote my first poem when I was 7 in second grade, and it was actually about the Loch Ness Monster. So I have evidence that, my fascination in the paranormal goes back fairly young, but so does my love of story. So when I started writing, became more serious about writing, I decided that I wanted to write a paranormal book for practice, just to see if I could do it. And it happened that, this is in probably 2005. My kids are little and I'm working full time, and, I'm up one night, my daughter couldn't sleep. And so I was watching a paranormal show on TV, and I'm like, we're 7 seasons into this and they never find anything. But then it occurred to me, well, what if they did find something, but it was a truth they could never tell? And that kind of became the nexus for the Veritas Codex series, which is my paranormal thriller series, my first one. And so I began writing that just quietly in the background, for practice. I didn't think anybody would ever read it. In fact, I intended that nobody would ever read it because I could be as outlandish as I wanted to be. And it was all about a paranormal investigation crew as they went on the hunt for Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. And in the middle of the investigation, the lead investigator disappears. She's gone for 10 days. She has no memory of what happened to her, but there's evidence that she was abducted by Bigfoot. So was it Bigfoot? Was it aliens? Well, it's a pity she can't remember. And so I wrote that book, and it took me, maybe 7-8 months to really kind of flesh out the story. And then I started editing, and I had a critique group that I went to where I would kind of read parts of the story and get my fellow writers to give me input on how to make it better. And I started going to writers' conferences. And in the middle of all that, I put that story away, but those characters wouldn't leave me alone. They wanted to tell more stories. So I thought, okay, well, let's see if I can write a sequel. So it was 2012. It was about the time everybody was going crazy about the whole Mayan apocalypse thing. So I thought, okay, well, we'll make this about the Mayan apocalypse. And so The Jaguar Queen was born, which is the second book in the series. And I enjoyed writing that, and it was great. And I put it away, and I'm going to writers' conferences, and I'm working a day job and raising my family. But the story, there was more to it. So I started writing a third book, and then I wrote a fourth book. And so I had all these books just sitting, in a computer file, not really knowing what to do with them. And so I was at a writers' conference in Oklahoma City called WriterCon. It was Labor Day weekend in 2019. And I had written in my notes, within the next year, I'm going to do one thing that's going to get me invited to be a speaker at this writers' conference, because I was already speaking at safety conferences. It was something I love to do. I'm a natural trainer. I like to teach people things, taught occupational safety for years. So I put that in my notes and quietly forgot about it until they announced that was the year that they were going to do a writing cruise. And that was going to be in February of 2020. So I went home and I told my husband, I said, look, I think if I'm really serious about this writing career that I want to have, I feel like this is where I need to be. He's like, well, do I get to go? And I'm like, yes, you get to go. He's like, sign up. We're out of here. So we signed up to go on this writing cruise, and we had to send in a manuscript. And I thought, okay, well, I have to send in the one that scares me the most, the one that nobody was ever supposed to read. So I sent in what would become the Veritas Codex. And we had daily classes. While we were at sea, we did things at port where we were, going out on excursions and things like that. And we actually went to Chichen Itza on one of the excursions, which is where the Jaguar Queen was set. So here I am pitching this book to an agent. I'm actually pitching the second book to a publisher. We've already talked about the first book. He's seen it, but I'm talking about the second book while we're walking through. And finally, the tour guide turned to me and said, you know as much about this place as I do. Do you want to lead the tour group? Which I really think is what sold my series, because we got back from that cruise just as the pandemic hit. And I thought, well, this is it. Nobody's going to be publishing any books this year. And boy, I couldn't be wrong, because within a couple of weeks, I had an email saying, we would like to publish your series, not your book, your series. And that's really kind of how my writing finally took off, was because I got out of my own way and had the courage to say, yes, my stories are wild and outlandish, but there's a market for this. People are interested in it. People want to believe. So that's kind of how the writing started. That's a long answer to a short question.
No, but that's fantastic. What an awesome story on how that began. I didn't know it was so recent.
Yeah.
Just a few years back. And you're very prolific looking at your website.
Yes.
So many
Well,
books.
when you have 4 books already done.
I guess, yeah, you were kind of ahead of the game there. Yeah. But and how many have you published since that began?
Book 8 comes out tomorrow. That is the Sultan's Stone. It's book 8 of the Veritas Codex series, and it's set at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. And then I have a second series called the Manifest Destiny series that launched in July of last year, and book 3 will be out in March of this year. And then I have various other novellas and small compendiums that have been put out that are short stories that I have been able to get published through various publishers. And I have already written books 9, 10, and 11 for the Veritas Codex series because I don't wait for the publisher. I already know how 12 is going to go. And then I will reevaluate what's going to happen with that series and see if I want to pivot with another character or if I'm ready to move on and do something different. And I don't really have any plans for the Manifest Destiny series. I co-write that with my fellow author, J.B. Kane, who's also on the podcast with me. And we really wanted something that was kind of a short little airplane read. It's technically a novella. It's under 50,000 words and follows two sisters who are hunting down cursed artifacts as part of a secret society. So it's very much the librarians meet Warehouse 13.
You started off speaking about when you were younger in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Let's touch on that real quick.
We were there for such a short period of time, and I was so very young that we didn't really, I didn't get to go paranormal investigating. It wasn't a thing back in, 1970, whatever. And but we hiked all the time. We were always outdoors. We'd go camping and fishing and hiking. And, my grandfather loved all that kind of stuff. We'd take the ferry up to Vancouver. And so we were always in the woods. Now, as I got older, I was a little more intentional when I was out in the woods. I was always looking for what might be out there. And I never really had anything specific in mind, but I always thought, there's such a big world. How could there not be something that people have never found? If you think about the great apes, they didn't find them until the 40s, and everybody thought they were just a myth. So I was always kind of, aware that there might be something out there. Of course, the $6 Million Man had Bigfoot in it. So I knew about it from them. And then Harry and the Hendersons came out.
I remember that episode. Oh yeah.
The Legend of Boggy Creek, that wasn't very far from us in Oklahoma. It's actually over here in Arkansas now. But so I was always out in the woods, and I have pictures of myself, and I had actually gone in and labeled, I'm looking for Bigfoot on pictures when I'm like 10, 11 years old. I've become more intentional now as an adult. I'm still out in the woods hiking all the time. We go camping quite a bit. We've traveled the country. And I've been much more intentional now as I'm older. And it's led to some really interesting findings, not anything that I can qualify or quantify, but I've had what I call my 3 near misses as an adult. We had gone down to southeastern Oklahoma. I had a friend that was an author who wrote similar stuff to what I write. And he lived in an area called Honubby, which is the Bigfoot capital of Oklahoma, believe it or not. It's very mountainous. It's very rugged. It's rural. And we had gone down to see him and gone for his book signing. And he said, well, if you take the highway down towards where my house is, he said, there's a sign that says, home of the Bigfoot Highway. He said, you should stop there, take some pictures before you head back. You can use it for your marketing, whatever. He was a genius. So we did, and we stopped, and I'm under the sign getting my picture taken. My husband's taking it for me. And just this horrible smell came out of nowhere. Just this awful, horrific, cat litter, dead animal, foundry. I mean, think of all the nasty things you can think of. That's what it smelled like. And so my husband's like, yeah, that's not very pleasant. Let's get out of here. I'm like, yeah, I've got what I wanted. Let's go. So while we're driving home, I text my friend who had sent me down there, and I said, do you have a rendering plant or a paper mill in that area? Because, I'm thinking occupational safety. Those are the stinkiest places I can think of that I've been. And he texted me back. He said, what did you smell? And I told him exactly as I've told you. And he said, that's the booger. And I'm like, the what? He said, that's Bigfoot. He said, they stink. They're horribly smelly. And I'm like, wow. Okay. And so I've smelled it. That's different. I had not expected that. That was not something I was anticipating. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but certainly got a good whiff of it. A couple years after that, we had gone to Blue Ridge, Georgia on a girls' retreat, and had stopped in a little town called Ellijay, Georgia, which is home of Expedition Bigfoot, which is a museum. I highly recommend if anybody ever gets anywhere near Blue Ridge, Georgia, it's just north of Atlanta, stop in Ellijay, say hi to Amanda, the Bigfoot lady. She works there. And she had given us a tour and told us all about some of her experiences. And her mother was a paranormal investigator and into ghost hunting, and she did genealogy and stuff like that. So I was very interested in that because I'm a genealogist too. And so they had recordings where you could put on headphones and you could listen to recordings that had been captured in the area. And so we did all that. And the next day, one of my fellow podcasters that was with us, we had decided to go take a hike that morning. And it had stormed the night before, and it was still kind of cold and kind of wet, and there were trees down. So there were crews out clearing down the trees on one of these trails that we were hiking. And he had gotten his chainsaw caught up in the tree and had to go back and get another one. He was just getting ready to set up to start trying to cut out the first chainsaw. And so he was asking us, how far are you going? What are you doing? He said, I like to kind of keep an eye on guests when they're out here just to kind of make sure everybody's okay. And, so we kind of told him, he said, well, if you get to the waterfall, that's probably a nice place to turn around. Sounds like that's right up your area, the kind of level that you're looking for today. And so, we said our goodbyes and he helped us over the fallen trees and we went on our way. And we get out to this beautiful valley and you can see out over a river and there's trees and, it's just gorgeous up there. Everything was so green. And about that time, he fired up that chainsaw. And it was very loud, even from, we were probably a mile away at that point. But this blood-curdling scream, this howl, came out across the valley. And it was one of those you couldn't tell which direction it came from. But my partner and I, we just looked at each other and we both knew that was the booger. We had heard the same recordings the day before at the museum. So we've heard it. And then I had gone to the Pacific Northwest. I'd gone back to Seattle. I had a friend that lived up there, and we had gone a couple years ago. And I wanted to go back up to Mount St. Helens, which is where the Veritas Codex is set. I wanted to see how I did. Did I get anything wrong? Did I get anything right? What were my takeaways? What could I have done differently? And in truth, the only thing I think I could have done differently is I didn't factor in the fact that there is a road. I made them hike everywhere. They could have just gotten in a truck and driven, but no, I made them hike everywhere. But we're up walking and hiking on one of the trails north of the volcano, which was where most of the damage was done after Mount St. Helens. And it's new forest growth. It's recovering quite well. Beautiful country. And I'm, looking around at the ground. My husband's looking at the birds and the views and the vistas. And I'm watching the ground looking for footprints. And I didn't find any. But the next day in the newspaper, there was a report of footprints that were found on the trail we had hiked just hours after we had left. So we missed the footprints by, maybe hours, maybe less. So those are my 3 big Bigfoot near misses.
That is so cool. When you were talking about that stench, boy, yeah, I've heard about that. I definitely understand the association with people. Maybe they had the sighting, maybe they didn't, but that smell would be there. So you definitely, that is a very common thing.
It is an unmistakable odor. Once you smell it, you'll never forget it.
I can imagine.
Vile.
And the Oklahoma area is very, people may not think about or associate Sasquatch with that, but boy, there are a lot of sightings out of Oklahoma.
And you'd be surprised how many of them are in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area.
Yeah, it's crazy.
There's a nature preserve just west of Oklahoma City. It was a mile and a half from our house. And I had no idea it was there until I started hearing from the local Bigfoot investigators that they had sightings at this national preserve, at this national park. So we had gone out there and hiked and looked. There were reports that came through the news in northwest Oklahoma City near Edmond of daylight Bigfoot sightings in the city. And, we think about all the rural places, but, we've encroached on their territory. They've almost got nowhere to go. And the trails and pathways that they've used for centuries, eons, whatever the case may be, have changed. And they're still trying to find their path through.
Yeah, I think they follow the waterways. I believe even the Finding Bigfoot guys, Matt Moneymaker, Cliff, Bo, I think they've been down there to Oklahoma investigating and have recorded some sounds and stuff. There's just a lot of action there. You wouldn't think that, but that is so cool.
And, I just moved to Arkansas a year ago, and I have been meeting with some of the local paranormal investigators here and asking about their experiences. And there are a lot in this area as well. Of course, we live out in the woods. I've got deer in my backyard, every day. So, I'm always on the lookout.
Yeah, get those trail cams up.
Exactly.
You just never know. But yeah, if you're in
You
a
don't.
wooded area, you've got a chance for some action for sure.
Yep.
The paranormal investigations, let's talk about that. And where did you finally take that leap and say, yeah, I'm going to do some investigating? And what was that about?
Right. Yeah, it really started. My mom was always interested in this kind of thing. So she always encouraged me. She encouraged me to write. She encouraged me to, explore the world with a sense of wonder. And so she had found a place in Oklahoma called the historic Fort Reno. They were doing public ghost hunts that you could go to, and they do them like around Halloween. And they got to the point where the paranormal investigators were finding, the actual real paranormal investigators were finding so much evidence that there was a big demand to be, they wanted to come back out. Well, if they're going to let them in, just let the public come in and they'll take a tour around. And so my mom and I got to the point where we did that almost every month and just really kind of followed the paranormal investigation teams, asked a lot of questions. My mom and I are both genealogists. So we made friends with the folks there at the fort. And there were a couple of historical records they were looking for they could not find. And so my mom and I said, well, we'll let us help. What can we do? We'll volunteer. And so they had a couple of things that they were trying to prove or disprove. And they turned us loose. And of course, Oklahoma has a wonderful historical center. So I went to the historical museum, pulled up old newspapers from the era, old records, land grants, newspaper clippings, anything we could find to provide them with the evidence they were looking for. And we actually found exactly what they were looking for, which was the documentation of a suicide that happened on the fort, where the bullet hole is still in the wall. So we were out there so often that we kind of became the de facto safety team. While they were doing the tours, we would just kind of walk around with the groups. We'd already heard the stories. We knew where to go, what to look for, things like that. But we just made sure people didn't wander off into places they didn't belong. And one of the things I do, I'm trying to be very scientific because I'm a federally trained investigator. I try to follow the same methods I would use with a fatality investigation when I'm doing a paranormal investigation. I do my research. I try to know the location. I go out. I do a physical visual inspection before it gets dark because I'm horrible with vision at night. Night blindness is a horrible curse for a paranormal investigator who likes to be out in the woods. I'll just say that.
I imagine.
So I had gone out there on one evening and done a complete baseline, before it got dark, walked around a couple of the buildings that I knew we were going to stop and talk about because they don't let you go in the buildings anymore. Knew where all the potholes were, where people could trip and fall, where I wanted to take pictures. I took pictures of the old Victorian is probably the most notable building on the premises. And, look at the windows, look at the structure, that kind of thing. That night while we're walking through with the group, I paused at one of the windows that just kept calling to me. And I took several snapshots in rapid succession. And I'm looking down at my digital camera. This is before iPhones even. And there is very clearly a face in the window, hand up by his face, like an old man leaning out. What are you kids doing on my yard? Kind of thing. And you could see the outline of the eye sockets. He had a beard. You could make out the mouth. And you could just see this face in the picture. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And of course, everybody wanted to come over and see it. And even the real paranormal investigators, because at the time I still didn't think of myself as a real paranormal investigator, came over to look at those pictures. And she's like, good catch. You're one of us now. So, that was my first, that really kind of inspired me. I was gung ho after that. I wanted to go to every old building, every haunted location, every haunted hotel I could stay at. I wanted to. So that was really kind of where that started for me. And it's not slowed down any at all.
That is awesome. And I'd love to see that picture if it still exists.
It is. Actually, I have it out on my social media. So I'll send you a link to that.
What's kind of your favorite evidence you've had?
That by far is my favorite evidence because that's the most solid piece of data that I've been able to collect. I've had other experiences that I can't quantify quite so well, but I would not trade them for anything because they tell the story of these locations. And that's, again, as an author, I want to know the story. I want to know the history. I want to know the legends. Haunted hotels, I have a very unique fascination with those. I've stayed at the Skirvin Hotel in downtown Oklahoma City, which is 1920s era, one of the first really nice hotels in Indian Territory after the state, even before the state was founded. The NBA players have been sent running out of that place in the middle of the night because it's so haunted. I've stayed there. I've investigated there. I have a set of spirit dice that I have taken in there and used in my investigation. I'm usually pretty hands-on. I want senses and visual, data, but to use that was kind of a new technique for me the last time I was there. You just kind of you ask a question and then you roll the dice, and it works kind of like a tarot or a Ouija board without being so spooky. And had some very interesting results from that. So I've stayed at the Skirvin. I've stayed there several times. I haven't stayed at the Stanley Hotel. That is one place that I have been to the Stanley Hotel. I've stood in the parking lot no less than 6 times, and I can't bring myself to go inside, and I can't explain why. There's something there. There's something there that doesn't want me to come in, and I think it's because it knows I know it's there. So when I'm writing the Veritas Codex, I threw that in as one of the scariest things that happens to my characters. Something happens in the Stanley Hotel. And we're circling back to that in book 8. So it's going to come full circle. So I have not stayed there, but I keep telling myself, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go there. I'm going to at least go inside. I may not stay here, but I'm going to at least go inside, have a drink at the bar, have lunch, something. I'm going to go into there and get past this fear. But the last time I was there, I still couldn't do it. I've stayed at the Stratter Hotel in Durango. I've stayed at, there's one in Louisville, Kentucky that's blanking out on the name of it. But I've stayed at multiple hotels that are haunted just because I think they're so fascinating. May Stringer House in Florida, that was less than 2 years ago. We had gone on one of the public tours, and we had a couple of pieces of equipment. We had a audio recorder. We had it was basically the multimeter, the electric meter. Yeah. And we were going around, and they had one room that had like military history of the area. It wasn't things that had necessarily been in the house. It had been brought in because it was the county museum. So all the military stuff had been put in one small room. And so we were asking, the spirit questions like, can you tell us who you are? Is this your gun? What's your name? Things like that. And we kept getting Bob. And we say, Bob, is this your gun? No. Bob, is this your coat? No. Bob, is there anything in this room that is yours? No. Are you in this room? No. The answers kept saying no. And we'd say, can you tell us more about you? And it would just say Bob. And so we thought that was just really interesting. And then later, after the investigation was done, I was walking around outside because I always try to do an outside sweep afterwards. I'm basically kind of clearing my energy before I get in the car to go home. And there were gravestones leaning against the wall, right outside the wall where we were. And they clearly didn't belong there. The gravestones, don't sit in people's yards. So, I'm wondering, why are these here? And I get to noticing one of them was for Robert. And so I went back inside and I asked one of the docents who were there, and I said, tell me about the gravestones outside. And he said, yeah. He said, those were found in a pawn shop. Somebody had stolen them and then pawned them, and the pawn shop couldn't sell them. So they were just sitting around in this pawn shop. So because they were stolen goods, they were remanded into the custody of the Historical Society. And they had come from various cemeteries. They didn't know where Bob belonged. So I started doing my genealogy research, and I found everything about Bob, where he was supposed to be buried, where his gravestone belonged, and all the history on how he died. And he died right at the beginning of the Civil War in Florida, less than a county away. And his gravestone just simply needs to be returned back to where it belongs, because we've identified where that goes now. So, being able to help in that aspect is really kind of icing on the cake, because the story is what I really enjoy.
Awesome. You're a talented investigator there to be able to trace what many have tried and weren't able to do. And then you go in there with your talent and you're able to do that. That is really cool.
You have to think outside the box, I think. And I think a lot of people are only focused on the paranormal. And I always tell people when I'm investigating, I look for the normal and then I'll look for the paranormal. So I always look at it from a historian standpoint as well as a genealogy standpoint, because if somebody lived, there's a record of them. It may not be a good record. It may be hard to find, but somebody somewhere kept a record on that person when they were born, if they owned land, when they got married, when they died, where they're buried. You just have to know where to look.
Well, if I ever need an investigator, I know who to reach out to. That is really cool. Tell me about the buildings you investigated.
Yeah.
Tell me about when you went to those places and what that was like and what that felt like for you.
Right. So I worked for the state labor department in Oklahoma for 28 years. I was 18 years old when I started. I was a temp. Started out as a clerk typist doing asbestos abatement licenses, worked my way up to asbestos inspector, and then later become a safety consultant and then an enforcement. I was the assistant director of the public sector enforcement. So I did fatality investigations for police, firefighters, city workers, county workers that were killed on the job. Also investigated other accidents and near misses and things like that. And as an asbestos inspector, we typically were the last people to inspect a building before it got torn down. So a lot of the old historic buildings that got torn down in Oklahoma City, we'd have to go in. A contractor would take the asbestos out, and it was our job to verify that they got everything, that it was clean, before the building was torn down. But sometimes we did investigations like that when the building was just being renovated. So they would have to do an asbestos abatement or removal before they could do the renovation. And the Skirvin Hotel, downtown Oklahoma City, was one of those buildings that I inspected. I was primarily there focused on worker safety for the contractors who were doing the asbestos, but also to make sure the asbestos didn't get out of containment and into like the ventilation systems or the public parts of the building that weren't being affected. So I would get calls from the contractor saying, we're going to have to breach containment because the water got turned on behind the poly where they've sealed it off with plastic. And there's no physical way anybody could reach the faucet to turn the water on. But they're going to have to turn it off. Otherwise, it's just going to keep running and it could flood or who knows what else could happen. So we would have to go back out there and re-inspect every time they had to breach containment. So that happened rather frequently. I got stories of power tools getting turned on when they weren't even plugged in. And I still can't explain that because that's not physically possible. They had one near miss, a bench grinder. The worker had unplugged it and set it down. And he said it had stopped rotating. But when he set it down, it kicked back at him and he had an injury as a result of it. So just, some of those things where the public was not allowed in those areas while that work was being done. And the contractors required that we be there because they're doing the work and we're there to keep them safe. When the Murrah building happened, when the bombing happened in Oklahoma City, I was less than a mile away. I was on my way to do an inspection in Northwest Oklahoma City on the other side of town. But my coworker who had taken the government car the day before had not filled up the gas tank and it needed gas. So I had gone to the motor pool to fill up the gas tank. And I was actually at the gas station when the building exploded. And even the glass doors and plate glass windows a mile away undulated. I mean, it wasn't just like it vibrated. You could see the rolling glass as that pressure force went by, and it blew everybody's eardrums, it popped your ears really bad, whole pressure shift. I knew something had happened. My first thought was, oh my gosh, a plane has crashed in downtown Oklahoma City because there's an airport not very far from where the Murrah building was. I didn't even have it in my paradigm that anybody would want to, explode a box van in downtown Oklahoma City. So I got my gas and went on my way to go do my inspection. And while I'm in containment, they called me there's like a window where you can view in and out. They called me to the window, and the supervisor, I always give him my pager when I go in case there's an emergency. And he held up my pager to the window and it had call the office 911, which was our code for emergencies back when we had pagers. So I had to shower out, finish my inspection, shower out, find a phone, because that was back before everybody had a cell phone, and call the office. And they're like, there have been threats made against government employees. We're sending everyone home. You need to come, turn in the state car. Don't go inside. Take your equipment and go home. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go home. Well, when I got home, this was like 3:00 in the afternoon. It happened at 9. So at 3:00 in the afternoon, I get home. And of course, the traffic was snarled. You couldn't get gas anywhere at that point. Everybody's freaking out. I'm listening to it on the radio, and they're talking about what's happened and how horrid it is. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my parents were supposed to be in downtown Oklahoma City that morning to get their Social Security taken care of. They just retired, and they would have been in that building. So I don't go home. I go to my parents' house because I'm assuming they're home. Please let them be home. Well, I get home and there's nobody there. My mom had been cleaning the mini blinds the day before, and the mini blinds were blown out of the window and laying in the living room floor, which I thought was really odd. It's like, why are the mini blinds on the floor? That's not like my mother. She's like Martha Stewart. Her house is immaculate. So I get home. I start calling. Can't get through to anything. All the phone lines are bogged down with emergency calls coming in and out, people trying to reach each other. I'm watching the news. I have no idea where my parents are. Finally get a call from the boss saying, we want everybody to stay home the rest of the day and don't come to work until we call you and tell you it's safe to come back to work. So I have nothing to do for 3 days but sit and watch the news and not know where my parents are. Finally got a call from my aunt in Denver. My mother had gotten a call into her. She got a call to me to let me know that my mother was at the hospital working. She was a nurse. They had not gone downtown that morning. She decided to get another cup of coffee, and he took another lap at the track. And they had not gotten down there, but they had been for the last 3 days. She'd been working at the hospital, helping with the emergency response. And my dad was shuttling people back and forth to the blood bank so that they could get blood donors for the victims. So after 3 days, I finally knew what was going on with my parents. Well, then we got the call that we're going back to work and to be prepared to go work at the site. We'd have to go through security clearance. We'd need all the protective equipment because all the buildings around the Murrah bombing had damage to the insulation and the asbestos that was in those buildings. So I spent months working downtown in the buildings around the Murrah building. And I stood at the corner of that building while they were doing body recovery. And I kind of could get a feeling where they might find somebody, but I never was able to confirm or deny where those bodies were recovered from until many, many years later when they started to release some of that information. And I had a couple of them that I was actually pretty accurate with. And it could have just been educated training, could have been my safety skills kicking in. But I still have a very hard time going down to the memorial, which is a beautiful tribute to those that we lost and those that were changed forever, which our city was changed forever after that. And so many of them were children, which is the worst to me. I mean, it's people at work, it's awful, but when it's children, as a mother and, safety professional, those are two of the hardest things for me to accept. So I have to approach that location with a bit of standoffishness. I have a hard time going down there. So not long after that, when the World Trade Center happened, because of my experiences at the Murrah bombing, they sent me to the World Trade Center to help with the safety effort for the workers in the pit. That happened in September of 2001, and I was there in March of 2002. And they were all the way down to the bottom of the pit and still removing bodies from the parking garage. And there were times where I would see a worker and not know for sure if that was actual physical person or a memory of a person. So that was very difficult, as you can imagine.
Describe that, what you just stated.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
There were so many people that had worked there that, they lost their coworkers. The firefighters that had been there from the beginning, from day one, were there every single day looking for their friends, their brothers, their sons, and just the hollow look on their face, the hollowness in their eyes. I was never sure if life had left them or if they were physical presences. You know, it was so hard to know. There was so much tragedy in that place that it was present every single day, walking through the site, going through the process of doing the work, watching for hazards to make sure people didn't get hurt. They did so many wonderful things right at that location and so many awful things wrong. I'm not judging because they did what they had to do in the moment. But there were so many workers who had been there from the get-go that had no protective equipment the day it happened. They breathed in the worst of the hazards the first few days of the disaster. And by the time, I got there, they were tired. They were worn out, and they were mentally exhausted, spiritually drained. And, it almost was like they were walking ghosts. They were shells of themselves. Now, Katrina went down for Hurricane Katrina with OSHA's National Disaster Response Team. And that was a different feel. New Orleans already has kind of a vibe. There's a lot of ghosts that lived there long before Katrina. The first assignment they gave us I was partnered with an industrial hygienist out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, delightful lady. We're still really good friends. We still keep in touch. And they sent us to Charity Hospital, which is the oldest public hospital in North America. It's just outside the quarter. It's right down the street from the Superdome. It's where all the city's indigent are treated. And when the disaster happened, they knew several, they knew enough time they could evacuate the people who could be transported. But there were a lot of patients who could not be moved. And when the hurricane actually hit, of course, they lost all power. The basement and the first floor flooded, which the emergency room was on. It was on the first floor, but it was a higher level. It's an old building, so it's not exactly flat on the base levels. But the morgue flooded, the engine room, the backup generators all flooded. I mean, it wasn't. There's some security things that we could probably break down in a hazard assessment now, looking back, but they hadn't thought about it then. And they had stayed in that building for 10 days with no flushing toilets, no electricity, no air conditioning. It was 107 degrees when we were there. And I don't even want to venture what the humidity was. It was miserable. And here we are in Tyvek suits, respirators, rubber boots, rubber gloves, in the dark. We had to walk the whole building, which is 27 stories. It's a whole city block with none of these things, no air conditioning, no lights. No elevator. So we had to climb stairs, which is not a lot of fun in the heat. But that was one of those buildings where you could feel eyes on you. We would see things out of the corner of our eyes. I heard my name called. My partner is to my left, and my name comes from my right. And I'm like looking for Anne, and she's like, I'm over here, Betsy. And I'm like, I heard you over here call my name. And she goes, that wasn't me. And she had the same thing happen to her on one of the stairwells. I hadn't made it to the stairwell yet, and she'd started up without me. And she said I called her name from below, and I'm like, I hadn't even got to the stairwell yet. I was looking for you, but I didn't know where you went, and I was not calling your name. So just there were a lot of things like that in New Orleans, and that I write a lot of my more horror themed novels or novellas are typically written in New Orleans. If I'm looking for a great place for a setting, that's one of the first places I think of, because there's so much history and so much tragedy in New Orleans that it always lends itself well to a good spooky story.
I imagine. Any other notable buildings that you inspected?
No, most of the ones I had inspected were relatively small, nondescript. I will take that back. There was one in Oklahoma City that was the old Continental Baking Company. And it was where all the kids used to go on their school field trip. They had little mini bread pans that you could get your own little loaf of bread when you got done. And it was just a really neat place because they made all the bread for pretty much central Oklahoma. And it had closed down for many, many years. And they had talked about, what are we going to do with it? And so they decided they were going to put a basketball arena there. They were going to put a hockey arena at first, and because we had a hockey team, and then when the arena got done, then basketball moved into Oklahoma City and took over the arena and ran the hockey team out. But I had to inspect that building before they got ready to tear it down. And that's when I swear I'm writing a murder mystery with the big penultimate scene. The showdown with the killer is going to be in that building because it was so terrifying. It had been vacant for so long that the homeless population had moved in. They had, barrels that they would set fires in for warmth, and they would hunt pigeons and cats and anything they could catch to cook and eat. So we'd find carcasses and things like that in there. There was needles and all manner of nasty things in there. And of course, it had flooded. So there was water standing in the basement that was about knee deep. You'd have to wear hip boots to go in. Dark, no power, filthy, nasty, just a horrible place. So when they tore that down, it's like, you know what, that's going in a book, but I will never forget that building. And it was one of those where you could feel eyes on you in there as well. And you didn't know if it was, a homeless person watching you or if there was a spirit there, because I'm sure people died in that building as well. But that's now where the Thunder play basketball.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I've had a couple of premonitions too about weather, which is very helpful when you live in Oklahoma. I'm not as accurate as the National Weather Service, but I've had 2 or 3 really good, I don't know if I call them good, but I've had very strong premonitions before a storm hit. May 3rd, 1999 is a day that lives in infamy in Oklahoma City because the largest tornado ever recorded was on the ground for over an hour in central Oklahoma, all the way from Lawton, Oklahoma, up I-44. It came into Oklahoma City on the southwest side and then turned right into Moore. Multiple fatalities, miles of destruction, whole neighborhoods wiped out completely, took out part of I-35. It went on to Tinker Air Force Base. It went up into eastern Oklahoma. I mean, it was a long track tornado, and we'd known days ahead that it was coming. And the night before that tornado hit, I had a very vivid dream about where I was, what was happening. I mean, down to what people said in the dream. So we're on the way to we had season tickets for the hockey team. And so we're on our way to the hockey game because it was a championship playoff game. And I'm telling my mother this dream. And I said, and we're sitting at the hockey game, and the PA announcer comes on and says, folks, there's bad weather in the area. So we're going to take this party downstairs to the parking garage and stay there until the weather passes. And then we're going to come back upstairs, play some hockey, and get this season wrapped up, whatever else he said. And so, my mom, she's hearing me tell her the story while we're driving to the hockey game. She goes, your grandmother used to do this kind of thing to me all the time. I hate it when you're right. And all the way home, she's like, I hate it when you're right. I hate it when you're right. Because I was right. Almost exactly what the PA announcer said is what happened, in real life. So I've had that. I did safety consultations for businesses, and I would go out and help them with things like their emergency action plan, their chemical safety plan, things like that. And I had one company that I'd had a dream about weather, and it just so happened that the next day I was out in their neighborhood working with them. And, I asked them, I said, do you have a plan for severe weather? Where would you go if a tornado was coming and you couldn't get people home in time? You obviously don't want to wait till the last minute, try to send somebody home in this weather. You don't want to be in a car. You want to be in a building. And he said, well, we really don't have a shelter location. It's a big metal building with metal tools and metal things. He said, I don't even know where we begin. And I said, if you're open to it while we're walking through, maybe we can identify, a best case scenario where you can make do with what you have. And so we did that. And I said, okay, now what we need to do, we picked out a break area that was a concrete reinforced structure within the building. I said, we need to communicate to all the employees, at least verbally, so that you have an interim protection in place. Let's tell everybody where they need to go, what they need to do. So if anything were to happen today, they would be prepared. And he said, okay, we'll do that. And he was a wonderful employer because he was so open to it. And as we were going through, he's telling all his employees, here's what we're going to do if the weather gets bad. And we could have some bad weather this week. And the next day, the front of their building got taken off. Now, it happened after hours. There's only a few people there at the shop when the tornado hit. But they were able to get into shelter. They were protected and nobody got hurt. So I've had a couple of things like that happen. And again, I hate it when I'm right.
Yeah. When it's like that.
Yeah. But I mean, I made some good out of it.
100%. Do you have dreams? Do you ever have like dreams where you wake up and you're like, okay, I'm going to write this down?
Very much so. Sometimes the theme for my books will come from a dream like that too. I was writing what became book 4 of the Veritas Codex Series. I didn't write them in order because I kind of write in circles. And I was kind of thinking about what this book needed to be about. And the line came to me in my dream, the devil had it coming. And that was the only thing I knew. And so when I started putting the story together, I wrote to that theme. And I wrote that book in 23 days because I knew the theme. I knew the historical facts. I did my research while I was writing. Everything just fell into place. And I love it when that kind of thing happens. So I do kind of keep some notes, usually on a sticky note. I've got sticky notes all over my desk. And the devil had it coming was one of those sticky notes that was on my desk for the whole time I was writing that book.
We were talking about your podcast, the Unfreakingbelievable Podcast.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome.
We also call it the UFB podcast because let's face it, Unfreakingbelievable is hard to spell and it takes too long to say it multiple times. So the UFB podcast is all about, we have guests come on and tell the story of the moment that made a difference in their lives because of that one inciting incident. As an author, we always look for that inciting incident, the moment where they go from the status quo to something changes, something happens, and then it changes that person forever. And so we're just now starting our 3rd season. We've had over 50 episodes. We have had everyone from Hollywood actors to movie producers, directors, authors, everyday people, paranormal investigators, because we don't just cover the paranormal. We cover those moments of truth, the act of faith, the act of courage, or, sometimes even near miss experiences. We try to cover the gamut. We try to balance out the stories that we tell every episode, and we publish ours twice a month. Our episodes drop on the 11th and the 27th of every month. So we've been really lucky. The guest train has not ended because everybody has an unfreaking believable moment of some kind. It's just how you tell it that really has impact. And we've had episodes where we have been sitting there. We only do audio too, which I really love because video can be problematic in editing. But we've had episodes we're literally just sitting there with tears rolling down our eyes trying to get the questions out because the stories are so heart-touching and so relevant to everyone. It's wonderful when we have an episode. We have a lot of them where we laugh and joke and cut up and we have a good time. But to have one that really tugs at the heartstrings is really something special.
100%. And I am going to start digging into that show for sure. Starting with that episode we were talking about, you and I.
Yep.
That is so interesting.
Oh,
yeah. So
yeah.
I'm going to get into that, but I don't know where you find time. But I'm glad you did to come on this show. That's for sure. You got so much going on. But
yeah,
I do appreciate you making the time to come and speak on my little show here. I really appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. It's always nice to visit with other podcasters and investigators and even people who are just curious about the unknown. I love that.
Absolutely. It makes 2 of us. Thank you again. And the prolific writer you are, all the wonderful books you have, where can people find you, find your show, anything, any information you want to give?
Absolutely. The best place to start is my website, and it's www.author.betseykulakowski.com. And I hope you have show notes that you can put that up there on, because it's usually my first name that people spell wrong because I spell it differently. It's Betsey. And then Kulakowski, it's spelled just like it sounds, Kulakowski. But I'm also on social media as author Betsey K. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Pinterest, I'm on Threads, I'm on X. I don't like calling it that. It's Twitter. It'll always be Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I mean, I'm out there. You can find me. But my website has everything, including there's a link to the podcast, to our podcast website, which is ufbpodcast.com. So I'm out there and I love connecting with readers. I'm always happy to talk craft and books and, all that fun stuff. Also, same with the paranormal community. I am going to be a VIP speaker at the Arkansas Paranormal Fest, or Cryptid Fest, which is June 6th in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm really excited about that because my local paranormal community is coming together, and I'm going to get to meet some folks, and I'm excited about that.
That's awesome. Betsey, thank you again. I truly appreciate you coming on, spending the time. Thanks so
I've really
much.
enjoyed it.
Let's
Thank
stay
you.
in touch. Thank you.
Will do.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate you being here. If you have an account to share and would like to be on the show, email me at show@accountsoftheparanormal.com and tell me what you saw. You can catch this show wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our website, accountsoftheparanormal.com, where you can access full episodes and links to all our socials and our YouTube channel, where you can listen and watch along with visual images. And if you're a fan of what you heard here, please like, share, follow, subscribe. I appreciate the support. I'll see you next time.